Hello everyone and welcome to this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising, with Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters across the franchised and independent dealer sectors.
Hello and welcome to this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast interview powered by Motors. Today we're delighted to welcome back friend of the pod, Steve Young, Managing Director of ICDP, the International Automotive Retailing and After Sales Consultancy. Steve is joining us for the latest in our regular chats about recent headlines and trends impacting the car retailing sector. So, as ever, Steve, plenty to talk about on the pod in the world of dealers and OEMs, including, no doubt, agency, EVs, new Chinese entrants, and much more besides.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me back. It's been a little while and quite a lot's gone on. So happy to be
here. We've got a lot of catching up to do with you, Steve.
Well, we'll give it a try.
We could probably do it weekly, Steve. You'd probably still have enough to talk about on a weekly basis, wouldn't you, to be fair?
Well, I don't have a problem filling the blog every week, so I think you're probably right.
As we're recording, you are in Berlin at the minute, and you're hosting your ICDP spring meeting. Do you want to tell us and the listeners a little bit about the event and the themes that you're going to be focusing on this year?
Yeah, sure. We have 3 of these what we call main meetings a year. Take them around different locations in Europe to suit the members, and it's the opportunity where we have to actually share the results of the research program and actually get into some discussions with the members and the members with each other. So it's a great sort of networking event. It's still no substitute for being face to face, in my view, although we still have some who like the webinar format, and their probably their CFOs in particular like the webinar format and saving on traveling expense. But we persist, and we'll persist as long as we can to have these events.
And there's a lot going on, and you say this is in Berlin, and from a European perspective. What do you think you're going to be generating at the minute in terms of interest in Europe that the UK retailers should be sort of looking at and listening out for that's happening across Europe?
Well, I think the reality is that UK national sales companies in general, not just in the UK, actually have little influence on the strategic direction of the OEMs. So what we see in terms of agency, for example, is coming out of the various locations in Europe. It's not coming out of the UK in terms of that strategic intent. So this afternoon, for example, we'll have a presentation from Jörg Heinemann, who's the head of Model D for Mercedes in Europe. So he's been driving that program now for several years. Also now has the responsibility for sales in Mercedes in Germany. So quite a senior guy. So he's coming along, which will be interesting. But, whatever you're looking at, whether it's agency, whether it's the product, whether it's the what they're doing in terms of used car programs and so on, that tends to come out from the headquarters as a strategy. So what happens in Europe is important to all the dealers in the UK. And also, we have the situation currently, you touched on it in your intro, with the Chinese brands and the discussions going on in Brussels about tariffs on Chinese cars. Now, in principle, that will only apply in the EU, but I think it's fairly evident that the CMA in the UK will in some way follow suit. They'll see what happens. They're already making noises about tariffs for UK imports as well. So Brexit may have happened, but we're still quite closely tied into what happens in continental Europe.
And funnily enough, Steve, we will be returning to some of those themes over the course of our conversation, but we couldn't have you back on the pod without getting your take on Cazoo following the announcement earlier this month that it will halt its direct sales activities and reinvent itself as a used car marketplace. What do you make of these latest developments?
Well, absolutely not surprised. It was fairly clear, to me from the beginning that Cazoo was not going to work, and it wasn't just sort of taking offence at some of the comments that Chesterman made, but the whole thing was ill-founded, and the view that the existing model was completely broken, and there were, dealers were dinosaurs and customers were being shortchanged and so on. And at the same time, they were going to make 15% margin out of a business, which, can be profitable, but not at that level, was just obviously flawed. So I never had any money riding on Cazoo being successful. I'm slightly surprised it stumbled on this far, probably helped by the pricing during the pandemic, to be honest. And it's just a shame that Chesterman walks away with a load of money when a whole load of employees have lose their jobs, and some good businesses basically no longer exist, like Imperial, for example.
Yeah, and you make a good point there about when they came to market, very critical of the existing retailing model, and as you described, describing dealers as dinosaurs. But for Cazoo to succeed in any shape or form as a marketplace, it will need the support of those dealers. Do you think it can pull it off?
No, I mean, I think that, there's two aspects to it. One is that of all the billions that were spent, a good chunk of that went into building a consumer brand. So that is now completely wasted, basically. But from the point of view of the potential to trade, I think that the majority of dealers would rather forego a sale than buy a car from Cazoo. They've got lots of other options as to where to source product from. And one of the issues that Cazoo has had is sourcing product when it's not plugged into a natural source like the manufacturer's cars and sort of big fleet deals and so on. So I don't see what Cazoo brings to the party that the existing platforms don't have, and they're not hobbled by the reputation that Cazoo brings with it. I appreciate it's not the same people, but I just don't think that the dealers will do anything to help Cazoo succeed. So I'd give it another 12 months max.
That's interesting, because really Cazoo, they've only actually got the name because they don't have the back ends, do they? They don't actually have the infrastructure to go to market as a marketplace, because that wasn't in the original plan. It wasn't in their DNA.
No, it wasn't. And obviously all the brand building was to feed a consumer market, not a B2B market. So I think that they're trying to make the best of what's left, and clearly it's not the same management, it's not the same backers. The backing now comes from basically a fund that rescued Cazoo a couple of months ago, and they've been sat there, I think, scratching their head trying to work out what to do with it, short of winding it down immediately. And this is the best they've come up with. But I think probably the actual platform itself technically is a good platform, so perhaps they'll sell that on to somebody. But no, we're looking at sort of a prolonged death rather than a rebirth.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it's a topic we'll return to. But just stay with us for the second half of this interview with Steve Young after the break.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on a special weekday episode of Motor Trade Radio. Powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising.
So, Steve, touching on what we sort of talked about briefly at the introduction, and this year on the podcast, and can't believe we're only at the end of March already, but we talk about how the rollout of agency, particularly in the UK, has hit what you might describe as a few bumps in the road. And correct me if I'm wrong, but Stellantis plans are on hold for the minute until 2026. JLR have dropped its plans to move, although it does say that it will review back in again in 2027. Audi have scaled back its plans, reportedly just a single EV model from the forthcoming Q6 e-tron that's due out in the market, whilst BMW has reaffirmed it will start with Mini in October this year and BMW cars in 2026. I mean, what's your take on what's happening at the minute? I mean, we've touched on it a few times previously, and you talked through some of the complexities and the problems that the OEMs may face. Is this now sort of coming to the forefront and reality of what you sort of touched on previously on our chats?
Yeah, I think, as I've said before, the whole problem with the way the agency has been implemented is that it's been approached as an IT project, a contract change, and you just get to a particular date and switch over, and that's just so far from the reality that it's unbelievable. I think a number of manufacturers have been ill-advised or haven't thought things through properly themselves. It is a complete change in the way that we sell cars from the way that we've operated, the customers have been used to for decades. And so you can't approach that as like an IT project where you just switch one system off, switch another system on, and everything's going to be wonderful. And I think that's the reality that's struck home. It requires a lot more preparation. It requires resources on this part of the manufacturer, and skills on the part of the manufacturer that they've not had any requirement for in the past, and those need to be put into place. So I think when you look at Stellantis and you say it's on hold, it's postponed till 2026, I think that's the wrong way of looking at it, not just for Stellantis, but in general. The point is that this is probably a 2-year lead-in terms of the preparation to move to agency, and probably a 2-year settling down period afterwards to get the processes honed, to get the data working, the data analytics working, and so on. We're looking at a 4 or 5 year change program, and fortunately, from the point of view of Stellantis and the dealers in the UK, then the way that they've restructured their implementation program, gives them 2+ years to prepare. But it's in the public domain that we're involved with that, and my thinking at least is that it is not sit back for 2 years and then do a switch over. That would just repeat all the same problems. It's 2 years to put some capabilities in place, and then in 2.5 years' time, decide whether the time is right to flick the switch. And that's just a general best practice in terms of how to approach a major change like this. You don't flick the switch, and that's the lesson that's been learned, and that's what's being applied elsewhere. So Volvo in the UK has switched, and we are where we are, and they'll gradually refine that and improve it and get it settled down. But it has been a more difficult change than it could have been, and they've changed the implementation rollout for agency beyond the UK to give that more progressive build-up of capabilities and then switch over. And it's just a complete misconception about what's involved in moving from franchise to agency. It's not that agency is wrong, it's that there's a lot more preparation required than simply getting some systems at work.
And I mean, Dale Wyatt recently talked about it being sort of equivalent to grand designs, that, you know, the plans and things change and you find out things and you have to, you know, it seems like there is a little bit of that going on, doesn't it? The initial plans, and I think, you know, you clearly talk about it a lot, that at the same time they're dealing with a lot going on, whether that's ZEV mandate in the UK, the CAFE in the global market, import-export challenges, transition to EV. The OEMs have got a lot on the plates at the minute, haven't they, in terms of what they're trying to manage and tackle while still remain profitable and productive.
They have, and I think that that's something that Luca De Meo at Renault said, 2 years ago, that he's not saying yes or no to agency, he's saying now is not the right time. And I think that's, from my understanding, that's broadly the position that Jaguar Land Rover have now taken as well, that they're not saying no to agency, they're just saying there's so much else going on that it's crazy to then try and load a complete change in the distribution model in on top of it. Now, should you've come to that conclusion earlier? We can debate that one, but the point is, at least they're not creating that massive overload and huge amount of extra risk at the end of the year. But I'm a fan of grand designs, and I think that when you watch them, you see that some of the plans are utterly naive at the beginning.
Yeah.
Someone who's going to convert some ruined barn up in the Dales close to you, Philip, into a
the small budget and no plans.
Huge eco house, and they're going to do it 50,000 times. They're going to do it before winter comes in, and we all watch those at the beginning and go, well, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
And it's been a little bit of that. But then the others are where they then discover that they've got asbestos in the old building or something, some little surprise waiting for them. Well, I don't think there's been many surprises in the agency implementations. All the things that have been a problem, you could have anticipated were going to be a problem. So it's just that upfront planning stage has been built on false assumptions rather than finding asbestos in the house.
So it's more, it was originally described as U-turns, which was obviously taken from the political landscape, but it seems more like it is just a logical, strategic review of when they take these, when it happens and how quickly it happens.
Yeah, there's nobody that I'm aware of who's actually said, that wasn't a good idea. So they've paused, they've rescheduled, restructured the implementation plan, and it means things will happen more slowly than had been the plan originally. But no one has said, it was a bad idea, we're going to rip it all up and go back to franchise. And that's true, not just in the UK, but in Europe, across all of the brands. So the tendency is still in that direction, but with a more sensible time frame.
And Steve, moving on to the other hot topic of the moment, you recently interviewed Earl J. Hesterberg, who'll be familiar to a lot of listeners as the recently retired global boss of Group 1 Automotive, and before that he was head of sales and marketing for Ford of Europe. Now, inevitably the conversation turned to Chinese EV brands coming to Europe. Now, as an industry leader, in the form of L.J. Hesterberg, what was his take on the likely scenarios?
Well, Errol's got a very international perspective. Yes, he was the head of Group 1, and primarily that's a US business, now plus the UK business. But he spent time in Europe with Nissan, spent time here with Ford as well. He's traveled quite widely. And he, like me, just sees the Chinese brands coming into the European and US and other international markets as being absolutely inevitable. And you can do what you like with tariffs, but in the end, they will get past those. The Chinese brands will establish local manufacturing in Europe. In some cases, they're being helped along the way by the established brands. So Stellantis, for example, has bought a 20% stake in Leap Motor, and they're going to start producing cars in Turin. And will those be badged as Leap Motor? Will they be badged as, Peugeots or Fiat or whatever? I don't know, but it doesn't matter. There's still going to be an avenue for those cars to come in, and you've got the same thing happening potentially with some of the other brands. So it's absolutely inevitable that the Chinese will come here, and it's the respectable end, if I can put it that way, of the Chinese brands that we should focus on. There's a whole load of minor brands that are bankrupt, close to bankrupt, and aren't going to get bailed out as Leap Motor have done, or Xpeng have done by Stellantis and Volkswagen respectively. But when you look at the Cherries, the Geelys, the Guangzhou Autos, SAIC, Cherry, these guys are big serious players, and they're coming. And I've likened it in the past to a steamroller. It's coming. They're not too bothered about the pace. They'd like to do it far faster than they are actually achieving. But whatever rocks you put in the road, they will get crushed, and they will be here. Then they'll be part of the European industry in just the same way as the Japanese and the Koreans now are, and are welcomed and appreciated by customers and dealers alike.
And from Earl Hesterberg's perspective, as you say, very focused on the sort of OEM and dealer side of things because of his background. Was there anything he was saying in terms of how those legacy brands couldn't sort of protect their market shares at the moment?
The only long-term response is through product. It's by being competitive, and there's no point trying to hide behind tariffs. Tariffs, at the very, very best, give you a couple of years relief. But one of the problems is that the Chinese are producing new cars in 2 years, and it's still taking some of the European players 4 or 5 years. And the product then is not necessarily as competitive as leading edge as it should be. The technology is moving on so quickly. You can't have a 4 or 5 year development program when the technology is substantially changed every 2 years. So it has to be done through product, and building on the customer relationships that we have, and so on.
And for anyone listening to the pod, if they want to access and see that interview, where do they see that?
They can connect through LinkedIn, so they'll find it on LinkedIn. That's always a nice, easy one. But all of the podcasts originally appear on ICDP.net, so they can go onto the ICDP.net website. Up at the top right, they'll find one that says blogs, and they can find them all there. And they can also register and get sort of the newsletters and get the blog sent to them, and so on. So no obligation, no cost. It's all there, and we're happy to share that.
That saves me doing that now. So yeah, I mean, as always, Steve, I mean, there's always a lot for us to catch up on, and I think it's interesting times, should we say? And I'm certainly looking forward to some of your takeaways from the next couple of days in Berlin, because I'm sure there'll be some fascinating conversations and some outtakes from those networking opportunities that you've got over there. But as Steve has said there, do sign up. If you've not signed up to Steve's weekly blogs, then you're missing out. Please do head over to, as Steve said there, to the ICDP website, which is icdp.net, as Steve has said there. Register for the blogs and anything else there. And as I say, there's a lot more on that website. So always take a look at ICDP when you can. So I mean, fantastic, great insight as always, Steve, and it's always a pleasure having you on. And
it's a pleasure to join you. Yeah, thank you very much. I will.
The German Wi-Fi held out.
It did indeed, yes.
Just about, yes.
German technology and reliability and so on is unfortunately a bit overrated in terms of the reality today versus what people think. But No, all is going well.
The rest of the world has caught up. That's what it is.
Well, I'm not sure either that or Germany's going backwards. I was sat next to a German lady on the plane last night who was bemoaning the strikes and unreliability of the German train system and all sorts of other things that you might not immediately associate with Germany. So it's times change.
Yes, definitely.
Well, there's another myth busted. So on that bombshell, that's all for now. Many thanks for joining us for this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast powered by Motors. Thanks once again to Steve for joining us and sharing his views on what's shaping the dealer sector. We're back with the headlines on Saturday. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. Philip and Curtis will be back with the week's big motor retailing headlines on Saturday. Live, on demand, wherever you are, on your podcast feed.